The silence at the tomb was more than silence, it was weight. A silence that pressed against the chest, that demanded respect without uttering a word. Hundreds of people stood in the courtyard, their cameras lowered, their voices hushed. It was not a place for chatter, it was a place for stillness, and at the center of that stillness stood the guard, his back straight, his rifle resting against his shoulder, his eyes fixed forward on nothing and everything at once. Not a twitch of muscle betrayed his thoughts, not a flicker of expression revealed the storm brewing in the distance. To him, this post was not duty alone, it was sacred, but even sacred places are not free from those who would defile them. Among the crowd, whispers rippled like wind across stone. A man had pushed forward, ignoring the lines, ignoring the barriers that marked off the sacred ground. At first, people thought he was simply an overeager tourist, but the way he moved, deliberate, confident, smirking as if the silence itself was a joke, made hearts tighten. His presence was wrong, his timing dangerous. The guard did not move. Cameras turned. Journalists leaned closer. Veterans in the crowd stiffened, sensing the same poison in the air that soldiers learn to detect long before a shot is fired. Mothers pulled their children close. A boy whispered, "Why won't anyone stop him?" His father hushed him, but the question hung heavy, echoing in every watching heart. The intruder's eyes narrowed on the guard. He muttered something, cruel enough to draw gasps from those nearest. Then he stepped further, closer than anyone should dare. The silence cracked not from the guard, but from the audience. A low wave of outrage rolling across the courtyard. Still, the guard stood motionless. For one unbearable moment, it seemed, the world itself was holding its breath. Every camera lens locked on the figure in red and gold, rifle gleaming in the afternoon sun. And then, a thought crossed the minds of many. He would step aside. He had to. Could hold such stillness under open challenge. But the crowd was wrong. The shot was over in less than a second. A single crack of thunder that split the silence of the tomb, echoing across the stone walls, leaving every soul present frozen in disbelief. It hadn't been a ceremonial volley, nor the accidental discharge of a weapon. It was a shot so precise, so impossible, that no one who witnessed it would ever forget. The guard, the man sworn to stillness, had raised his rifle with measured calm and fired one bullet into the unseen. And that bullet had silenced the snipers. Just moments before, the crowd had felt only unease. Families of veterans, schoolchildren, foreign dignitaries, they had come to honor the fallen, yet somewhere above them, in the shadowed ridges of the memorial's stone, rifles had been trained on innocent lives. The attack was planned, hidden in plain sight. The snipers had waited for a signal, their scopes glinting faintly in the harsh afternoon sun. No one noticed. No one but the guard. He had not flinched. He had not spoken, while the intruder and the crowd jeered, mocking sacrifice and daring the guard to break his silence. The real threat loomed higher, invisible to most eyes, and yet the guard saw it. He saw it, and he measured it. Every heartbeat felt like a drumbeat of history. Parents pulled children closer, veterans muttered darkly under their breath. Reporters raised cameras, expecting scandal or insult. They did not expect was salvation. The guard's motion was sudden but controlled, a movement honed by years of discipline. His rifle rose, his stance shifted. Before anyone could question, before the intruder could laugh again, the trigger broke. The impossible shot rang out. A sharp spark erupted from the stone ledge above. One sniper crumpled before he could fire. A second turned in shock, only to find his weapon useless, its scope shattered by the same miraculous trajectory. Silence followed total silence, heavier than before, pierced only by gasps from the crowd. They realized, in that heartbeat, what had been prevented, what one man, by discipline and instinct, had stopped. The intruder stumbled backward, the smirk gone from his face. The crowd looked not at him, but at the guard, the immovable figure who had chosen the one moment to move, and in doing so had saved them all. The boy who had whispered in doubt earlier tugged at his father's sleeve, his eyes wide. "Dad," he said softly, "did he just save everyone?" The father could only nod, his throat tight, because he too had seen what honor truly meant. And as the guard returned to his post, rifle steady, face unreadable, the crowd knew they had witnessed more than an impossible shot. They had witnessed history. The guard had not always been a silent figure in a ceremonial uniform. Long before the white gloves and polished rifle, he had been a soldier in the dirt, under fire, thousands of miles from home. His name was Daniel. Reed, though, here at the tomb, names did not matter. What mattered was presence. What mattered was the oath. Daniel's path to this post had begun in the deserts of a foreign war. He had been 22 when his unit was ambushed during a routine patrol. The blast from an improvised explosive device had torn the ground beneath them, and in the chaos, his closest friend, Corporal James Whitaker, was caught in the line of fire. Daniel dragged him to cover, but the wound was mortal. Whitaker pressed his dog tags into Daniel's hand, whispering, "Don't let them forget us." Minutes later, he was gone. That moment carved itself into Daniel's memory. He returned home alive, but he never returned whole. The noise of fireworks at July celebrations made his chest tighten. The smell of diesel fuel sent him back to the desert. Yet amid the shadows of trauma, one clarity remained. He would dedicate himself to honoring those who had fallen, not with speeches or politics, but with silence. When he applied for the elite Tomb Guard unit, he was told the training was brutal, the discipline unyielding. That was what drew him. He embraced the long nights of marching drills, the endless inspections, the punishing demand for perfection. Every click of his heel, every rotation of his rifle, every second he held motionless in the freezing rain, it all felt like penance and purpose at once. Guarding the tomb was not a job, it was a promise, but promises have enemies. The man who stepped forward that day in the crowd was not a mere heckler. His name was Victor Hale, a wealthy politician who had built his career on bravado. He styled himself as a patriot, but in truth, his respect for sacrifice was shallow. Behind closed doors, he scoffed at soldiers wasting their lives on foreign soil. He had never worn a uniform, yet he wielded power over those who had. Hale had a gift for spectacle. Every appearance was staged to draw attention. And today, the solemn ceremony at the tomb offered him an irresistible stage. His aides had warned him, begged him not to cause a scene, but he dismissed them. "These guards are statues in costumes," he sneered. "I'll show the cameras what real power looks like." What few knew was that Hale's stunt was more than arrogance. Intelligence later revealed that he had arranged for snipers to be positioned nearby, their orders vague enough to shield him from direct blame. If chaos broke out, if shots were fired, Hale would emerge as the bold politician who exposed weakness in the nation's most sacred place. He wanted shock, he wanted scandal, and above all, he wanted his name in headlines. The location only amplified the stakes. Arlington was not just ground, it was hallowed ground. Beneath the marble lay generations of soldiers who had given their lives. Families came here to weep, to touch the carved names, to whisper goodbyes that were never spoken in life. For the guards, every second on duty was a covenant with those who could no longer stand. The very air seemed to demand reverence, and that was precisely why Hale chose it. To him, reverence was weakness. Where others saw sacrifice, he saw a chance to step on tradition and look taller in the cameras. As the crowd gathered that afternoon, Daniel had already noticed Hale pushing his way to the front. He did not react outwardly, that was not the guard's way, but his instincts sharpened. Veterans recognized him instantly and muttered among themselves. Some despised him for his policies, others for his insults against military families. Parents tried to shield their children's eyes from his swagger. Reporters, sensing trouble, adjusted their lenses, hoping for a headline, and above, unseen by the crowd, the snipers adjusted their scopes. Their rifles rested against the cold stone ledges, trained on the courtyard. They waited, patient, knowing the moment would come when confusion broke out and their role would begin. Daniel's thoughts, however, were elsewhere. He stood rigid, rifle balanced, but in his mind, he heard Whitaker's final words, "Don't let them forget us." Every step of Hale's intrusion pressed against that memory like a bruise. To allow disrespect here was not simply an insult, it was betrayal. Hale's motives and Daniel's vow were about to collide. One man sought to use the tomb as a stage for ambition. The other stood ready to guard it with his very life. The crowd could feel the tension, even if they did not know the whole truth. Some whispered that the guard might break at last, might answer Hale's taunts. Others believed he would remain silent no matter the insult. What none of them foresaw was the moment to come, the flash of a rifle, the impossible shot that would etch itself into history. The air around the tomb of the unknowns was heavy with a silence that felt sacred, unbreakable. Visitors knew instinctively that this was not a place for laughter or idle chatter. Yet in the stillness, one sound carried sharper than any other. The deliberate scowl of Victor Hale's polished shoes as he moved closer to the guard. At first, the crowd thought he had simply overstepped, a man caught up in curiosity, but his smirk gave him away. It was not the expression of reverence but of calculation, as if the silence itself were a stage light meant for him. Parents frowned, veterans muttered under their breath, and reporters raised their cameras higher. already sensing something about to unfold. Daniel Reed, the guard at his post, did not so much as blink. His weapon gleamed in the sun, his posture perfect. He had learned in training that the essence of discipline was endurance, never revealing what boiled within. He heard Hale's approach, felt the vibration of his steps against the stone, but he remained fixed. Beautiful uniforms, Hale muttered loudly enough for those around to hear. But tell me, what do these men really protect? Stone silence. A ripple passed through the audience, a few gasps. A mother clutched her son's shoulder, urging him not to listen, but the boy stared wide-eyed at the guard, waiting for him to react. He did not. Hale smirked wider. He stepped closer, breaking the invisible barrier that all visitors respected. His voice grew sharper, dripping with scorn. Soldiers wasting their lives in deserts, dying for politicians who forget their names. And here stands the proof: silent statues guarding emptiness. A veteran in the crowd shouted, "Show some respect." His voice cracked with fury, and others murmured in agreement. A handful even started forward, but uniformed personnel gently held them back. This was not their moment to intervene. All eyes turned to the guard, waiting, wondering. But Daniel Reed did not move. His silence was heavier than Hale's insults, and that, perhaps, enraged the politician most of all. The tension thickened. Reporters whispered to each other, lenses zooming. They smelled scandal, the kind that would dominate front pages. The guard stoicism made for a perfect image, the embodiment of tradition confronted by arrogance, and yet, beneath the surface, another layer of threat lurked. On the ledges above, rifles shifted, scopes adjusted, their faint glassy glint invisible to most but clear to Daniel's trained eyes. He did not turn his head, but he had already marked their positions. He knew what Hale's performance truly concealed. This was not simply disrespect, this was staging. Still, he held his ground. Hale's voice grew louder. Look at him, not even man enough to answer, just a pawn in a costume, a mannequin pretending to be a soldier. Children shrank behind parents. A teenage boy muttered, "Why doesn't he do something?" His father whispered back, "Because discipline means more than anger." But even he wasn't sure how long the guard could endure this. Hale tested further, walking in a slow circle, forcing the guard to remain fixed as he mocked. "You all worship silence, but silence does nothing. Silence protects nothing. These men," he gestured broadly toward the guard, "are relics, clinging to a dead idea of honor." The veterans could stand no more. One elderly man, his chest adorned with faded service pins, called out, "You couldn't lace his boots on your best day." Applause broke from scattered pockets of the audience, but it only fueled Hale's arrogance. He turned toward the cameras, spreading his arms wide as if orchestrating the drama. Daniel heard the insults, felt the waves of anger and fear ripple through the crowd. Inside, the memory of Whitaker's dying words flared like fire. "Let them forget us." Every taunt Hale uttered was an attempt to erase that promise, to trample on sacrifice. Yet Daniel's face remained steel. Harley now closed the distance dangerously, his polished shoes echoing on the stone steps. He stood less than a yard from the guard, tilting his head mockingly. "Will you move if I push, or are you trained to be nothing more than a puppet?" A mother covered her child's eyes. Gasps spread across the courtyard. Reporters leaned in so far their shoulders bumped. Veterans clenched fists, muttering curses under their breath. Daniel did not move. Above, the snipers grew restless. Through their scopes, they tracked the motion, fingers tightening on triggers. The plan was working. Hale was the spark, the distraction. At the right moment, when chaos erupted, they would fire. But the crowd knew none of this. To them, this was a battle of wills, tradition against mockery, discipline against provocation. And each second the guard remained motionless, the tension wound tighter, ready to snap. Then Hale escalated again. He reached out, not yet touching, but extending a hand as though to shove the guard's shoulder. "Let's see if you're real," he sneered. The courtyard erupted in shouts. "Stop, leave him alone, respect the tomb." The voices blended into a chaotic wave. Children began to cry. Reporters nearly shouted into their microphones, broadcasting live reactions. Still, the guard stood unmoved. For Daniel, each second was not silence, but calculation. His ears picked up the faint metallic scrape of a rifle bolt above. His eyes tracked Hale's every twitch from the corner of his vision. His heart hammered, but his breathing remained steady. He was waiting for the line to be crossed. The moment to act, not from anger but from duty. Hale sneered, reveling in the uproar he had caused. He leaned even closer, his words venomous. "You protect nothing. You honor no one. You're just a prop in a forgotten ritual." The crowd gasped. Again, a child cried out, "Leave him alone." Her small voice cut through the chaos, but Hale ignored it. He was intoxicated by his own spectacle. And then, with a sudden flick of his hand, Hale shoved the guard's shoulder. The gasp that followed was not a ripple, it was a roar. The sacred silence shattered. Some people cried out in outrage, others, in fear. Veterans surged forward, only to be restrained. Reporters nearly dropped their equipment, stunned at the sight. The guard had been touched. The line had been crossed. And still Daniel Reed did not immediately move. He absorbed the shove, his boots locked, his body a pillar of stone, but inside, something shifted. This was no longer provocation, it was desecration. And above, in the ledges, he knew the rifles were waiting for this very moment. The silence that followed was unbearable, a vacuum of history itself holding its breath. Everyone stared at the guard, wondering, would he endure again, or would he finally act? The impossible moment had arrived, though none in the crowd yet realized it. What they thought was a test of patience was about to become a fight for lives. And Daniel Reed, silent sentinel of the tomb, was ready. The shove lingered like an echo in the air. The crowd's collective gasp still vibrated against the stone walls, a single sound of outrage and disbelief that seemed to last longer than it should. Victor Hale had done what no one dared. He had laid hands on the guard, and in doing so, he had broken the invisible covenant that protected this sacred ground. Daniel Reed absorbed the push without flinching. His boots remained planted, his shoulders squared, his eyes unblinking. To the crowd, it looked as if nothing had changed. But in that fraction of a second, the guard's mind ignited with clarity. He was no longer simply enduring insult. He was standing on the razor's edge between chaos and preservation. Above, the faint scrape of a rifle bolt reached his ears again, subtle, almost nothing, but to a trained soldier, it was the sound of imminent death. Daniel did not need to look up. He already knew where the snipers lay in wait. He had counted the glints, measured the angles in his peripheral vision. They were ready. All they needed was confusion, and Hale had delivered it. The crowd, unaware of the hidden rifles, focused only on the face. Mothers shouted at Hale to step back. Veterans cursed, straining against those who held them in place. Cameras zoomed in tighter, the scene now broadcast live to thousands. It was a spectacle, but none yet understood the danger rising like smoke. Above them, Hale sneered, mistaking the guard's stillness for weakness. "See nothing. He won't even defend himself," he declared, turning to the reporters. "This is your symbol, silent, useless." He never finished the sentence. Daniel moved. It was not rage that guided him, but precision. His rifle snapped into position in a single fluid motion, faster than most could register. The polished bayonet gleamed for an instant, then the barrel tilted upward. Gasps broke again, louder, as the crowd realized. The guard was not aiming at Hale, was aiming into the heights. Hale froze, startled. He hadn't expected this. Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger. For him, time slowed. His breath was steady, his heartbeat a metronome. He recalled every hour of training, every lesson in patience, every moment of stillness that had prepared him for this one motion. He remembered Whitaker's last words, "Don't let them forget us." This was the answer. The shot cracked like thunder. The courtyard shook with the force of it. Birds burst from the trees, scattering into the sky. A child screamed. For an instant, no one knew what had happened until the spark flashed from the ledge above. The first sniper fell, weapon clattering uselessly onto the stone. The second tried to adjust, but his scope exploded in a spray of glass, the bullet tearing through his sight before he could fire. A third recoiled, struck by shrapnel from his partner's ruined rifle, and tumbled backward out of position. 3 threats neutralized in less than a heartbeat. 1 bullet, 1 impossible shot. The silence that followed was absolute. The crowd did not cheer, they did not clap. They simply stared, breath held, at the realization of what had just occurred. The guard had not fired out of anger. He had not fired at Hale. He had fired upward, into the unseen, and saved them all. Reporters dropped their microphones. Parents clutched their children tighter, some weeping with relief they did not yet fully understand. Veterans stood straighter, eyes wide with a pride and awe that words could not hold. Hale stumbled backward, his bravado shattered. He had wanted spectacle, but not this. His lips moved, searching for an explanation, a denial, but the cameras had already caught it all. The shove, the guard's stillness, the impossible shot, the bodies falling from the ledge. The truth was inescapable. Daniel did not lower his rifle immediately. He scanned the ledges with a soldier's caution, ensuring the threat was gone. His eyes were sharp, his body still, every fiber alert. Only after confirming no more rifles waited in the shadows did he ease the weapon back into ceremonial stance. He had moved only when he must. Now, he returned to stillness. The crowd began to murmur again, the shock slowly cracking into fragments of realization. Someone whispered, "He saved us." Another voice echoed, "He saw them, he knew." A child tugged at her mother's hand, whispering, "He's not just standing there, he's watching everything." And still, Daniel did not speak. The guard never spoke. Security forces swarmed the perimeter, rushing to the ledges where the snipers had hidden. Radios crackled, orders barked, sirens wailed faintly in the distance as reinforcements closed in. But in the courtyard, all eyes remained locked on the lone figure at his post, his face unreadable, his body unshaken. Hale, sweating now, tried to recover. He straightened his jacket, glanced nervously at the cameras, and forced a laugh. He overreacted. That's all. There weren't any real. A scream from above cut him short. Officers dragged the wounded sniper into view, his weapon confiscated, the proof undeniable. Another was hauled out, handcuffed, cursing under his breath. Reporters shouted questions all at once, microphones thrust forward. The chaos Hale had hoped for had arrived, but it was chaos that damned him, not glorified him. The guard remained motionless. The weight of the moment pressed into the crowd like a tide. They had just witnessed something no one could have imagined. Discipline turned into action. Silence transformed into salvation. The impossible shot was real, and it had been fired not in anger but in duty. Daniel's mind, even in that stillness, flickered back to the desert, to Whitaker's last breath. "Don't let them forget us." He never would. At last, the silence broke not with applause, but with the low, reverent whisper of a veteran standing in the front row. His voice carried, trembling with awe, that man just saved every single one of us." The words spread like fire, whispered from mouth to mouth, until the whole crowd seemed to murmur them, not shouted, not cheered, but spoken as a prayer. Daniel Reed did not acknowledge them. He did what he had always done. He returned to his post, rifle in hand, gaze forward, a sentinel once more. The impossible shot was already history. The courtyard was no longer silent. Sirens wailed in the distance, boots thundered across the stone, and radios crackled as law enforcement and military security flooded the memorial. Officers swarmed the ledges, dragging down the men who had hidden there with rifles trained on the innocent. Cameras captured every second, broadcasting the spectacle live across the nation. Victor Hale stood at the center of the storm, his once confident posture now brittle. The smirk he had worn so easily just minutes before had drained from his face. Sweat gathered on his brow. He tried to step back, to fade into the sea of confusion, but the crowd wasn't looking away. Hundreds of eyes pinned him where he stood. Reporters shouted above the noise, "Mr. Hale, were you aware of the snipers?" The question pierced through the air like a spear. Others quickly followed. "Were you coordinating this? What's your connection to the men arrested?" Microphones pressed forward, voices overlapping. Hale raised his hands in protest. This is being misinterpreted. I was making a point, a political point. I had nothing to do with." But before he could finish, officers emerged with confiscated gear. Among it was a cell phone recovered from one of the snipers. On its screen, text messages glowed under the harsh sunlight, orders traced back to none other than Hale's private number. The evidence was damning, immediate. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Veterans shouted curses. Parents shielded their children, not from danger now, but from the sight of a man unraveling under the weight of his lies. The boy who had earlier asked why the guard did nothing pointed with wide eyes and whispered, "He's the bad guy." The guard did not turn his head. Daniel Reed stood in perfect stillness, as though none of the chaos concerned him. His rifle rested at his side once more, his gaze locked forward. He had done his part. What happened now was not his burden. Officers closed in on Hale. He tried one last performance, raising his voice for the cameras. "This is a mistake. I'm a patriot. I was exposing weakness." But the crowd no longer believed him. The cameras no longer softened him. His words dissolved into the noise of sirens and boots. An officer gripped his wrist, twisting it behind his back. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed across the stone. Hale's face contorted in anger and desperation. But the sound of the cuffs was louder than any excuse he could muster. The crowd erupted not in applause, but in a wave of murmurs, disbelief, and raw emotion. Reporters filmed every second, narrating in hurried voices, their words trembling with adrenaline. Veterans stood straighter, their eyes fixed not on Hale's humiliation but on the figure still unmoving at his post. One reporter whispered into her microphone, The guard has not spoken, has not reacted to the arrest. He stands as if nothing has happened. That calm, it's extraordinary. Daniel Reed heard nothing. His training kept his focus sharp, his body immovable. He had acted when necessary, and now his duty was to return to silence. The world could roar around him. He would remain the sentinel. The symbolism was undeniable. As Hale was dragged away in disgrace, thrashing against the cuffs, the guard did not move. Chaos tried to swallow the moment, but discipline reclaimed it. Order held fast. A veteran in the crowd saluted the guard, tears streaking down his cheeks. Others followed, standing tall, their hands to their brows in respect. A child whispered again, "He saved everyone," and this time his mother nodded, her eyes glistening. The cameras captured it, or the arrested politician being led away. The rifles confiscated. The crowd stirred into reverent silence, and above it all, the one image that would become iconic, the guard, rifle gleaming in the sun, back unbent, gaze fixed forward as though carved from stone. The impossible shot was already a legend. The arrest was already a headline, but the true image burned into history was not of action nor of chaos. It was of stillness, a single man unmoved, his discipline stronger than arrogance, stronger than violence, stronger even than the spectacle meant to destroy it, and in that stillness, the nation saw what honor truly meant. The courtyard slowly exhaled. The noise of sirens faded as the last police vehicles carried Hale away in custody. Reporters lingered, their lenses fixed on the guard who had not shifted even after the impossible had unfolded. The crowd's voices softened to murmurs, respectful, uncertain if they should stay or quietly withdraw. Colonel Hayes arrived through the parting throng, his decorated uniform catching the waning sunlight. His face carried the weight of decades of service, yet in that moment his eyes softened with something rare, pride unspoken. He halted a few paces from Daniel Reed, standing tall, measuring the young sentinel in silence. Then, in a gesture almost never performed at Arlington outside of funerals and ceremonies, the colonel lifted his hand in a crisp salute directed not toward a flag, nor toward a superior officer, but toward one soldier who had embodied the very spirit of the Guard's creed. Veterans nearby instinctively followed, their hands rising, to brows eyes glistening as discipline recognized discipline. Among the crowd, a boy tugged at his mother's sleeve. He leaned close, voice hushed with awe, and whispered, "He's a hero." His mother held him tighter, her eyes never leaving the silent figure on the steps. She nodded, not needing to explain further. The boy understood in his bones, but Daniel Reed did not break posture. His training demanded stillness. His duty demanded silence. Yet behind the unmoving eyes, memories flickered. He remembered a different battlefield dust smoke, a friend's last breath in his arms. He remembered the night he stared at his own reflection, asking if he had the strength to continue living for something greater. He remembered clutching a dog tag in the darkness, promising never to let sacrifice be in vain. Now, as the crowd honored him with reverence, his mind returned to that dog tag tucked into his pocket. It pressed against him like a heartbeat, reminder of the man who never came home. Daniel had carried his friend's memory into every drill, every step, every long night of vigil at the tomb. Today, he had carried it into fire. The colonel's salute lingered a moment longer before lowering. Quietly, he approached and spoke under his breath so only Daniel could hear. "You honored them all today, son. Every one of them." No reply came. There could be none. Daniel remained the sentinel, his vow unbroken. Reporters attempted to swarm, but officers held them back, insisting the guard would not be disturbed. Slowly, the crowd dispersed. Families left whispering about what they had witnessed. Veterans walking with heads high, children clutching parents' hands while sneaking glances back at the motionless figure. By the time twilight touched the memorial, the plaza had returned to its intended silence. Only a handful of guards remained, their relief rotation approaching. As the changing ceremony began, Daniel finally stepped back from his post. His boots struck the stone with measured precision, rifle in perfect alignment. He handed over his watch with flawless ritual, his expression betraying nothing of the storm he had quelled. Only when he walked the inner hall, shielded from public eyes, did he allow himself a breath that trembled faintly. He reached into his pocket, fingers curling around the worn dog tag. He closed his fist around it and lowered his head, whispering words no one else would ever hear. A prayer, a promise, a thank you. Later that night, alone in his quarters, he placed the dog tag beside a neatly folded note from his late friend, a letter stained and creased with years, and next to it, he laid the medal he had been awarded years earlier for service. Overseas, for a moment he simply looked at them, 3 symbols of a life lived in service: the past, the sacrifice, and today's vigil. He pressed his palm against the trio, his heart steady. Outside, the world already replayed his shot, his stillness, his silence. But here, in this quiet room, Daniel Reed was not legend nor symbol. He was simply a soldier keeping a promise. And tomorrow, when the bugle called again, he would return to his post, silent, still, eternal. Tradition is not weakness, stillness is not silence, and discipline, when tested, becomes the sharpest weapon of all. What the world witnessed that day at Arlington was more than a single guard stopping a man with power and arrogance. It was the embodiment of a vow that honor, once sworn, does not bend, does not break, and does not retreat in the face of disrespect. Daniel Reed's impossible shot silenced more than snipers. It silenced doubt. It silenced arrogance. It reminded every witness that service is not about glory, but about guardianship. In that frozen moment, when the world seemed to hold its breath, the guard did what countless generations of soldiers before him had done. He stood firm so that others might stand free. His calm resumption of duty, his return to stillness, spoke louder than victory shouts ever could. Discipline had conquered chaos. The boys' whisper, "He's a hero," was not just for Daniel Reed. It was for every sentinel who has walked those steps in rain and in snow, in heat and in darkness, carrying on the weight of memory. It was for every nameless soldier who never came home, whose sacrifice is carved into stone but lives on in the silence of the tomb. As the cameras replayed the shot across the world, a message carried far beyond the marble of Arlington, that traditions matter, that honor matters, that the guardianship of the fallen is not ceremonial, it is sacred. And now, that message is passed to you. If the silence of that guard spoke to something deep within you, if it stirred pride, reverence, or even a tear, then carry it forward. Share this story. Keep the memory alive, because every time we tell it, every time we remember, we take part in guarding the legacy of those who gave everything. Stillness is strength. Silence is not surrender. And honor, when tested, will always endure.